I'm 87 years old, and last Christmas morning, not one of my 4 children called me. Not one. Here's what nobody tells you about being a good mother. If you're too good at it, your children will forget you're human. They'll see you as a service, not a person, a checkbook, not a mother. I spent 60 years saying yes to everything. College tuitions, down payments, emergency babysitting. I thought that's what love looked like. Endless giving, no questions asked. Then my husband died, and the phone calls stopped, unless they needed money. So at 85, I did something that made all 4 of my successful children very, very angry. I changed my will. Instead of leaving them my house and savings, I gave it all to a scholarship fund for elementary school kids, the children who actually remember my name. If you've ever felt invisible to the people you love most, this story is for you. Subscribe if you want to hear what happened when I finally stopped being the perfect mother and started being myself. And please, leave me a comment. Tell me if you've ever felt like just a service instead of a person. I read every single one. I used to think I had the perfect family. You know the kind I mean. Sunday dinners with all 4 of my children gathered around that big mahogany table Harold bought when we first moved to this house, the one with the matching chairs that could seat 10 people if we squeezed together tight. Those were the good years, the 1990s mostly. Jennifer would bring her little ones, and they'd tear through the house like tiny hurricanes. David would argue with his father about politics while I carved the roast. Michael would sneak extra rolls when he thought I wasn't looking. And Sarah, my youngest, would help me in the kitchen, her hands still small enough to fit inside the good glasses when we washed them. The house was alive then, really alive. You could hear laughter bouncing off the walls, smell the pot roast and mashed potatoes mixing with someone's perfume and Harold's aftershave. There were always dishes in the sink, always someone needing something, more gravy, another napkin, help finding the bathroom. I lived for those Sundays. I'd start cooking on Friday, making sure everything was perfect. The good china came out, the cloth napkins. I'd polish that table until it gleamed like dark water. Harold used to sit at the head, carving the meat with his father's old knife. He had these big hands, steady hands. He'd slice each piece just so, making sure everyone got exactly what they wanted. Dark meat for David, no fat for Jennifer, the crispy end piece for little Tommy. I was the center of it all, the one who made it happen. When someone needed money for college, they came to me. When marriages got rocky, they called me. When babies were born, I was the first one at the hospital with casseroles and clean blankets. That's what mothers do, I told myself. We give, we provide, we make everything work. I remember one Sunday, must have been 1998 or so, when Jennifer called at the last minute. Her voice sounded different, distracted. There was noise in the background, car doors slamming, that electronic beeping you hear at grocery stores. "Mom," she said, without even asking how I was first. "Mom, can you watch the kids today?" Something came up. Not "can you watch the kids, please?" Not "sorry for the short notice, Mom." Just "Mom, can you watch the kids?" Like I was a service she could call. I said yes, of course. I always said yes. But after I hung up that old yellow phone in the kitchen, I stood there for a minute. Something felt different, off somehow. Harold looked up from his newspaper, his coffee getting cold in front of him. His eyes asked the question before his mouth did. "She's not coming to dinner," I told him. He just nodded and went back to reading. But I saw the way his jaw tightened. Harold always could read between the lines better than I could. When did they stop asking about my day, I wondered. When did the conversations become just about what they needed from me? But I pushed that thought away, buried it deep. This is what families do, I told myself. This is what love looks like. We help each other. We don't keep score. I kept telling myself that for years, even when the calls got shorter, even when the visits became requests instead of visits, even when I started to feel like an ATM with a heartbeat. I kept believing in that perfect family I thought I had built, right up until the day I realized it was all an illusion. The first time I felt truly invisible was Harold's funeral. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? Feeling invisible at your own husband's funeral. But that's exactly what happened. They all came, of course. My 4 successful children in their dark suits and respectful faces. They cried at the right moments, said the right things to the right people. Jennifer organized the flowers. David handled the funeral home arrangements. Michael gave a beautiful eulogy about what a wonderful father Harold had been. But nobody asked how I was sleeping. Nobody asked if I was eating. Nobody asked if the house felt too big, too quiet, too empty, without Harold's morning coffee routine and his evening news programs. The day after we buried him, they all went back to their lives, their jobs, their own families, their own problems. And I sat in this kitchen, staring at Harold's coffee mug, still sitting in the sink. I couldn't bring myself to wash it. The brown ring around the rim, the chip on the handle where he'd dropped it last Christmas. It was proof he'd been here, proof I hadn't imagined 42 years of marriage. The phone stopped ringing, just like that. During Harold's illness, I'd get calls every day. How's Dad feeling? What did the doctor say? Do you need anything from the store? After the funeral, silence. Complete, suffocating silence. 3 weeks passed, 21 days without a single call from any of my children. I started to wonder if my phone was broken. I'd pick up the receiver just to hear the dial tone, to make sure it still worked. On day 22, Michael finally called. My heart jumped when I heard his voice. Finally, I thought. Finally someone remembers I exist. "Mom," he said, his voice bright and cheerful. "I was wondering if you'd thought about what you want to do with Dad's tools. I could really use that drill press in my garage. Not how are you holding up, Mom. Not I've been thinking about you. Harold wasn't even cold in his grave, and my son was calling about power tools. I gave them to him, of course. I gave him everything he asked for. Harold's workshop, his fishing gear, his collection of old baseball cards. I couldn't say no. What was I going to do with a drill press anyway? But something cracked inside me that day. Something small but important. The crack got bigger on my 80th birthday. I'd been planning it for weeks. Nothing fancy, just dinner at that Italian restaurant downtown where Harold used to take me for our anniversary. I called each of them personally, left messages when they didn't answer. Jennifer had a work conference. David had his son's soccer tournament. Michael was taking his wife to some couples retreat. Sarah was dealing with her teenager's drama. I spent my 80th birthday eating chicken parmesan alone at a table for 6, with a single birthday card propped against the salt shaker. The waitress felt so sorry for me, she brought me free tiramisu and sang happy birthday in her sweet, embarrassed voice. That night I lay in bed listening to the grandfather clock tick in the hallway. Harold used to complain about that clock keeping him awake. Now its steady rhythm was the only sound in the house, the only proof that time was still passing. I started doing things I'd never done before, desperate things. I offered to pay for my granddaughter's entire college tuition. Suddenly, Michael had time for a 2-hour lunch to discuss the details. His whole face lit up when we talked about money, really lit up like I hadn't seen in years. For those 2 hours, I felt important again, needed, valuable. But after he left, after he'd hugged me tight and promised to call more often, I sat in my car in that restaurant parking lot and cried until my chest hurt. I wasn't buying love, I realized. I was renting attention, and the lease was always about to expire. Last Christmas morning, I woke up at 6:30 like I always do, made my coffee in Harold's old percolator, sat down at this kitchen table in my blue bathrobe, the one with the loose button I keep meaning to fix. 9 o'clock came and went, then 10, then 11. The phone never rang, not once. I could hear the neighbors' children outside screaming with delight over their new bicycles and video games. Mrs. Peterson's grandchildren were visiting from California, and their laughter drifted through my kitchen window like music I couldn't join. I sat there with my coffee growing cold in my hands, watching the morning light move across the empty chairs around my table. Harold's chair, the 4 chairs where my children used to sit when they were small, fighting over the last piece of bacon. At noon, I finally understood. I had spent 60 years being the perfect mother, the giving mother, the always available mother, the mother who never said no, never asked for anything in return, never expected her children to actually think about her unless they needed something. And what did I get for all that perfection? Christmas morning alone, not a single phone call, not even a text message. That afternoon I put on my good coat and drove to Peterson, Williams and Associates. That's the law firm downtown where Harold and I had our wills drawn up 20 years ago. Mr. Peterson's son runs it now, a nice young man with kind eyes who remembered my name. I want to make some changes, I told him. Big changes. Instead of leaving everything to my 4 children, I was establishing a scholarship fund. The Margaret Thompson Elementary Education Scholarship, for kids whose parents couldn't afford school supplies, field trips, the little extras that make learning special. You see, I volunteer at Roosevelt Elementary twice a week, have for the past 5 years, ever since Harold retired. I read to the 2nd graders, help with their spelling words, tie their shoes when the laces come undone. Those children light up when they see me, actually light up. They run to me in the hallways, show me their drawings, tell me about their loose teeth and their new puppies. They remember my name. They ask about my weekend. When little Maria Gonzalez hugs my leg and says, "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. You helped me read this whole book. I feel something I hadn't felt in years for my own grandchildren. I feel loved, not needed, loved." So I signed those papers with my arthritic hands, and I felt something I hadn't felt since Harold died. I felt powerful. I felt like my choices mattered again. 3 days later, I called a family meeting. They all came, of course. When money's involved, schedules suddenly become flexible. They sat around my dining room table, the same table where we'd shared all those Sunday dinners, looking at me like I'd lost my mind. "Mom," Jennifer said, her voice careful and controlled, like she was talking to a confused child. "Mom, we need to discuss this scholarship thing." David leaned forward, his face red the way it gets when he's angry. "You can't just give away our inheritance to strangers. our inheritance, like I was already dead, like my money belonged to them instead of me. Michael tried to be diplomatic. Mom, we're just worried about you. This seems so unlike you. Maybe we should have Dr. Patterson take a look. Make sure you're thinking clearly. And Sarah, my baby, started crying. Real tears this time, but they felt more angry than sad. How could you do this to us, she whispered, after everything we've done for you, everything they'd done for me? I looked around that table at these 4 adults I'd raised, these people I'd sacrificed everything for, and I started laughing, actually laughing, right there in front of them. What exactly have you done for me? I asked them. What exactly? The silence was deafening. That's when I knew I'd made the right choice. That night, after they all left with their angry words and their threats to contest the will, I sat in my bedroom and cried harder than I had since Harold died. But I wasn't crying about the money. I wasn't even crying about their anger. I was crying for the mother I used to be, the one who believed that if you just love your children enough, sacrifice enough, give enough, they'll love you back the same way. I was grieving the relationship I thought I had with them, the family I thought we were. You spend your whole life building this picture in your head, this story about who you are and what your love means. And then one day, reality crashes through that picture like a rock through glass, and you see what was really there all along. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was their bank account, their insurance policy, their backup plan. When did that happen? When did I become just a resource instead of a person? I stayed awake most of that night, listening to the house settle around me. Every creak and groan sounded different now, less lonely somehow, like the house was finally exhaling after holding its breath for years. 3 weeks later, I got my first letter from the scholarship committee. They'd selected little Maria Gonzalez as the first recipient. 7 years old, parents worked 2 jobs each, dreams of becoming a teacher, just like Mrs. Thompson, who reads to her every Tuesday. The letter came with a drawing. Maria had drawn a picture of me sitting in the tiny plastic chair in her classroom, surrounded by children with books in their hands. At the bottom, in her careful second-grade handwriting, she'd written, "Thank you for helping me learn." I put that drawing on my refrigerator, right where I used to hang my own children's artwork 30 years ago. The next week I got another letter, and another, thank you cards from parents I'd never met, telling me how much the scholarship meant to their families, photos of children buying their first real backpacks, their first set of colored pencils that belonged just to them. This is what gratitude looks like, I realized, pure and uncomplicated and real. My phone still doesn't ring very often. Jennifer calls maybe once a month, her voice stiff and formal. David sends Christmas cards with no personal message inside. Michael and Sarah haven't spoken to me since that family meeting. At first, that silence felt like punishment. Now it feels like freedom. This morning I made my coffee and sat down at this table like I do every day. Harold's chair is still pushed under where it belongs. I don't stare at it anymore with longing or sadness. It's just a chair now, a piece of furniture in a house where I've learned to be content with my own company. I'm 87 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I'm not waiting for anyone to call. I'm not hoping for visits that won't come. I'm not trying to buy love with money or guilt or endless availability. I volunteer at the school 3 days a week now. I have coffee with Mrs. Peterson on Thursdays. I read books Harold never wanted to read, watch programs he thought were silly. Yesterday, Maria brought me another drawing. This one showed both of us reading together, but we were the same size, two people sharing a story. That's when I understood something important. I spent 60 years teaching my children that love means always giving, never receiving, always available, never having needs of my own. I taught them to take me for granted, and they learned that lesson perfectly. But it's not too late for me to learn something new. I'm learning that real love doesn't keep you small. Real love doesn't make you disappear. Real love sees you, remembers your name, shows up when it says it will. I have that now, not from the people I expected, but I have it, and that's enough. At 87, I finally learned that I am enough, just as I am, just me,